I'm sure that you've seen it as well, because I had so many of my Christian friends share this video of a man in a university class, and the professor, who's an unbeliever, says, "Are there any Christians here?" And a man sticks up his hand and he says, "Yes." And he says, "If God is all good, why is there evil in this world?" And this young man says, "Professor, actually, there is no such thing as evil." And the professor says, "What are you talking about?" And the young man says, "Well, Professor, is there such thing as darkness?" And the professor says, "Of course there's darkness. You know, at night you can look outside, it's dark." And the young man says, "Actually, there is no such thing as darkness. You cannot measure darkness. You can only measure light. Darkness is actually just an absence of light."
Hmm.
And the young man said to the professor, "Is there such thing as cold?" And the professor says, "Yes, of course there is cold." The young man said, "Actually, there is no such thing as cold. You cannot measure cold. You can only measure heat. Cold is the absence of heat." And the young man said, "Well, therefore, evil is not a real thing. It's only the absence of good, the absence of God." And then Christians are sharing this, they love it. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, who controls the light switch? Who controls the thermostat?
Right.
Why did God allow for there to be a condition of an absence of him,
Right.
or an absence of good? And now you're right back to the same problem. And Christians are sharing this, and I say it's a terrible answer, because you're right back to square one. Now, here's the thing. It may be a good definition of what evil is, but it cannot be a reason for the problem of evil.
Yeah, think about a donut maker. Every donut has a hole in the middle, and it wouldn't be right to say that there is no hole, because the hole is just the lack of donut. Well, sure, but the donut maker planned for there to be a hole in the middle of that donut. So it doesn't explain away the hole by saying, well, it's just a lack of donut. You're right. Someone made that donut in the same way someone made this world. So even if evil is the deprivation or the privation of good, whoever made this world still needs to, we still need an explanation as to why he made it with evil in it.
Right. So those are three basic bad answers that I get. And people say, well, what answer do you give? And I say, I give people the same answer that God gave to Job, as we were talking about earlier. Of course, people know the story of Job, that he was an upright man, and Satan came to God and said, the only reason he's upright is because you've given him everything. And God says, okay, you can take everything away, but just don't kill him. Or just don't touch his body, was the thing that he said to Satan. So Satan, kills all his children, takes all his, possessions away, and Job still follows him. And Satan goes back to God and says, the reason he's still following you is because you didn't let me touch his body. And God says, okay, you can touch his body, but don't kill him. So he afflicts him with all these sores, and Job is in agony. His friends are, basically mocking him. And so Job is crying out to God, why, God? Why? He's asking him, basically, he's asking the same question that we're asking. Why is there evil? Why is this happening to me? Why, God? Why?
Right.
And then God finally answers him. And he says, Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you, basically, when I created the universe? Where were you, Job? And he asked him, I think 2 chapters long, where were you, Job? And what did Job do when God confronted him like this? It says in Job chapter 40, verse 4, I believe, he put his hand over his mouth. He said, I spoke too soon. And I say, wasn't Job so happy when God finally told him why there was evil, why these things happened to him? He never told him. And people, I think, often say that, in heaven, you're going to know why this evil thing happened to you. But there's no promise of that in Scripture. The thing is, in heaven, we're probably not going to care. So the answer that I gave people, the same answer that God gave Job, where were you? Where were you, Job? And I know that Scripture teaches that God is all good and there is evil. So the conclusion that we must make is that God has a morally sufficient reason for the evil that he allows in this world. Now, the thing is, I understand that's a biblical answer. And I don't very often get into the topic of evil on the street because, as we could talk about a little bit later on, the very presumption of evil is a presumption of a standard that there is goodness, which a person can't make sense of without God. But this is a question that I ask people when I'm on the street. I say, would it be evil for a man to stick a knife into the chest of a 3-year-old girl? And most often they say, oh yeah, that'd be terrible. It'd be evil. And I say, I'm going to give you a little bit more information. This girl, she has a heart defect. She's going to be dead in a week if she doesn't have surgery. But she lives in a country where they have to pay for their own surgery. And the family can't afford it. So the mother goes on national television. She's crying out. She says, please help my daughter. My daughter's going to be dead if she doesn't have this life-saving surgery. Please help her. And a world-famous heart surgeon sees this, from across the world. And he says, you know what? I'm going to do that surgery. So he pays for the flight to bring this girl to his country he pays for the hospital, pays for the attendance. This girl is under anesthetic. She's laying on a table, and the knife he's about to stick into her chest is a scalpel. He's about to save her life. I'm sure a story like that, it really hits home for someone like you, Joel, with what you've gone through in your life. And I say, is that man evil? And they say, no, it's the most loving thing he could do. I said, 30 seconds ago, you told me he was evil.
Right.
I said, what's the difference? The difference is now you have all the information.
Mm-hmm.
So when evil happens in my life, and it does happen in my life, I watched my father rot away from adult diabetes, lose both his legs, paralyzed on one side, died in agony with bed sores. But I know that God works all things for the good of those who love him. And I know that God has all the information. So the best times in my life are when I trust him in circumstances like that he is working all things for the good of those who love him. And my worst times in my life is when I don't trust him in circumstances like that. But the beauty of it is to know that God has all the information. And scripture says, in fact, that for his loved ones, that he works all things for the good of those who love him. And that's a comfort in those times.